I'm getting lots of pushback on the police using metrics to. Okay, so we agree that. Do we all agree that the police are a bureaucracy? Can we agree with that? If you disagree that the police are a bureaucracy, go ahead and leave a comment in the section below, and I'll say thank you for the comment, and I'll drop it there. Now that we have that resolved, police are a bureaucracy. It's a bureaucratic institution. Whatever form of police it is, sheriff, city police, state police, federal police, it's a bureaucracy. And they need to determine when, where, why, and how people get raises, promotions, how they determine if people are doing their job. Now, with the police, they're not sitting in an office somewhere. They're not in a building where people can observe them. They're out and about. You know how all the auditors say, call your supervisor? You know what that means. I'll give you a second to think about it. That means their supervisor isn't there. Their supervisor doesn't know what they're doing necessarily. Their supervisor's probably out doing other jobs, doing other things, I'm guessing, having never been a policeman or a police supervisor. But I'm guessing that that supervisor is doing other things, which is why that supervisor isn't there. So how do you, as a, just taking away, just stripping away the police interaction and everybody's seeming love of hating the police, at least in my channel. Everybody wants to hate the police, and that's fine. But how, as a supervisor, would you determine whether or not your cops are doing a good job? You'd have to figure out some way of doing it. And you don't want to go on feedback from the public necessarily because, well, yes, you do want to hear good things back about your police officers. You have to understand that if your officer arrests somebody, justified or unjustified, it doesn't matter which, they're going to be unhappy about it. The arrested person is going to be unhappy about it. And the arrested person's family is probably going to be unhappy about it. And their friends are probably going to be unhappy about it. So you can't really judge by that. Not effectively. It's not a good metric of how well your officer is doing. So how do you judge if your officers are out there actually working? Well, there is data out there that tells you how many crimes are being committed in a given area. You can judge things by how many tickets have been given in an area previously. So you know, like, this is a real hot spot for people to speed. This is a hot spot for people to run red lights, whatever. You have accident data that you can go back to. There are bureaucracies love to keep records and statistics. So they know, or they should know, they should be able to tell reasonably how much interaction with the public a police officer should have. And the interaction with the police, considering they know roughly speeding levels and illegal U-turn levels and things like that. They know where crime is getting reported. They know how often, statistically speaking, crime is getting reported. They use that information to allocate where they're sending their officers, I'm assuming. Like in a large city, certain substations are going to have more officers than other substations because certain substations have more calls for service than others do, I'm assuming. But again, they have to use a metric to determine whether their officers are working and who deserves a promotion or a raise or whatever. So an easy thing for them to do, since their officers are intended to be out there, not only catching speeders, because that is the officer's job, but catching bad guys and going out on calls for service and talking to people and interviewing them. And I know that Mr. Warden has fully indoctrinated everybody to believe that if you give them your name, it's going to go to a fusion center somewhere. but they also want to write the report. And if they can write your name in the report, then it actually looks like they're not BSing, that they're not just making up some report. And it can show that they actually did interact with the unit, might justify the time they spent out there on the call, etc. Are there quotas? Again, I don't believe it's a quota as far as you have to generate X number of tickets. But have you ever wondered why officers give written warnings? We know officers give warnings, and if they're bound to a quota, then why wouldn't they just write you a ticket? Because they got a quota to fill. But we know they don't. Not always, anyway. And I've been guilty of speeding past officers or making an illegal U-turn in front of officers. Oops, my bad. And the officers haven't responded, typically, because, you know, I don't know, they didn't have a quota to fill. So again, you have to look at all the evidence. And the evidence would suggest that because they're out there on their own, without any real good way of being supervised, they are going to be held to various metrics, which will include how often they interact with the public. And typically that's going to be in the form of tickets or arrests or things like that. So we're going to look at this one from Chaotic Good because he actually took some time to think about it. So I appreciate that. And I'm going to ignore the other ones who are just like, here's a newspaper article about how these cops are going to sue because they say that they had to do quotas. Well, maybe they're misunderstanding, misapplying, misinterpreting, and it is just an allegation at this point. There's nothing in court saying that they were doing quotas, etc. But he says, how can you just gloss over quotas being used as a metric for cops doing their job as being reasonable? Because they have to have some metric. And I'm not saying it's a quota. I'm saying that they're going to look at how many interactions. I'm not saying that they need to have X number of tickets. I'm saying that they probably have to have X number of interactions. And I'm sure that some interactions will justify a longer time spent than others. Like, I don't know, a school shooting or something. You know, you get a lot of time to be able to deal with all the witnesses, to deal with all the evidence, to do the traffic control around the scene, to, you know, all that. There's a lot more going on in something like that than there would be in a simple jaywalking ticket where you spend 5 minutes getting the guy's information, writing the ticket, handing it to him, explaining he needs to show up at court or whatever. So again, they need metrics. Why aren't security officers held to the same quotas to prove that they're doing their jobs? I would hazard that security officers are held to certain metrics. Obviously, security officers can't do tickets, can't give tickets, so that would be kind of silly. But I'm pretty sure that if, like, security guards have a poor evaluation when it comes to people breaking into the place that they're supposed to be providing security for, that would look negatively upon them. I know that when I've worked in retail as a salesman, I would talk to the security guys who go around looking for shoplifters and things. They have very serious metrics that they have to go by, and they get evaluated on how much loss the store would have and things like that. So yeah, there are serious metrics. There are serious quotas that, you know, these security guys would get bonuses and raises based on how few things got stolen and how many people they caught stealing. You know, if there's nobody trying to steal and nothing gets stolen, then they don't need the security guards. So there's no, you know, but if you have not a lot of people getting away with stealing, but you're catching a lot of people trying to steal, then those security guards get big raises or big bonuses. Big in the retail sense, meaning it isn't really very big, but you gotta, you know, you have to accuse at least 20 people a month of shoplifting, or yes. Well, so no, it goes down to, at least from my experience in a fairly limited retail environment, it it is about when they do the inventories. I think in the place I worked, it was an inventory like every quarter. They would try to figure out like how much inventory shrank in quotes, and they would. I'm not really familiar with what was going on entirely with it, but I know that the loss prevention team was big on like figuring out, and boy, they wanted to find every last missing penny because, there you go. I'm sure there's a metric on how many fires occur in a city. Why aren't firemen held to quotas of going out and finding folks that flick cigarettes? Because that's not the job of the firemen to do that. They get paid to sit around and be ready. I'm sure they have metrics. But then again, firemen are always they always go out as a team as well. So, the fire, not fire chief, but like the supervisor of that particular crew would be there with his team, and he'd be able to observe who was working and who wasn't, etc. So there you go. Funny how quotas are only found to be reasonable when it comes to goods rather than services in any other sector. Absolutely not. I have managed people who do phone calls, cold calls, and they had to do a certain number of calls a day, and they had to get a certain return on their calls. Absolutely, and that's a service. Salesmen are often held to not necessarily quotas, but metrics. I know you want to say quotas, but it's metrics. There were when I was in salesman, I mean, they had insane tools for tracking how profitable you were as a salesperson to the store. And I've worked sales in a couple places, and it's always a big thing. They desperately want to know, how much gross you're pushing out the door, how much net you're actually making the store, how many sales you're making, are you, there's a difference between someone who's like making 10 $5 sales in an hour or one $50 sale in an hour. There's a difference between them. You could tell how many guys, obviously you're not going to pay them any different, but you want to know about it, and you want to see who's doing what and see how well it's been. There's a ton. I mean, service industries have a ton of metrics. I know hospitals have a ton of metrics. I've dealt with some issues with hospitals, and they have, they log everything, and they should. But yeah, they have a ton of metrics on like how many people are required for a particular number of patients coming in. But again, they don't need they have the supervisors right there who could see it. So it doesn't really, they don't have to do it. They don't have to rely as rigorously on the metrics because they could watch the interactions and things like that. Waitresses don't have quotas. Neither does a doorman. Theoretically, maybe. It's hard to say. But again, waitresses and a doorman would have a supervisor right there. So who knows? Now, one could argue that a salesperson might have to meet a certain quota. Yeah, they do. But where their paycheck is generally a direct relationship to their sales, if she isn't getting sales because of not doing their job, they aren't getting a paycheck either. Maybe it is. There are other aspects of quotas that salesmen have to make depending on their industry, their particular industry. Like even salespeople who make a bunch of money in various industries still have to make X number of cold calls and get X number of returns on them. I've seen it. I've been there. I've lived it. It seems even in the service industry, it's not until we're talking about goods produced in the service where quotas start applying. No, I don't think so. The moving industry is definitely a service industry, and loading crews, we would to load or unload a shipment, somebody's house, basically. We would know how long it would take per 1,000 pounds, per 100 cube, we had that all worked out, and if crews weren't meeting those various performance goals, then we would know that that crew is an issue, and we'd either have to break it up. Maybe they were standing around talking too much, or we'd have to figure out who the dead weight was on that crew. So yeah, and the service, or the moving industry is a good example of it, because you have like independent contractors out there, and they do their thing, and obviously they want to get done and move in, so we don't worry about them. But like the local guys, those guys are the ones you have to actually like really, they're not independent contractors, so you got to really take your time and look at them and hold them to the metrics, because you can't be out there with them. You got, a bunch of drivers in a bunch of different areas of Northern California loading or unloading various stops throughout the day. And so, yeah, it's all metrics. How are police quotas reasonable when officers cannot perform their job because their only job is to ticket arrest until the end of the month, when the speed traps magically show up? I don't know that this technically exists. It may. I would love to see like actual statistics on it. I haven't seen anything ever presented to me that shows that like the number of tickets increase at the end of the month. So if you have something, please go ahead and put it in. I'd love to see it. But again, even then, metrics are still reasonable if they start doing the various metrics things at the end of the month. Like I've had salespeople who, they had to call X number of cold calls, and you figure out, okay, if you make 20 cold calls a day, every day, 5 days a week, that's 100 a week. And I've had salespeople do it like they're just all boom 100 at the end of that on Friday, right? And it doesn't usually work out well for them, but because they don't have enough time, and they try to rush through it, and you never get a real good return on your investment on that. Anyway, that's I hope that makes sense. Again, I'm not saying that there aren't quotas in the form of metrics, like they need a number of interactions, but going from there to saying it's something about generating revenue, I haven't seen anything on it. I know everybody wants to believe that, but that doesn't mean that that is reality. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.